Hey guys, Mr. Backberg here. In this video, we're going to look at half-angle identities. So as we're taking a look at our half-angle identities, for the sine, we've got the sine of u over 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 1 minus the cosine of u over 2. For the cosine, we've got the cosine of u over 2 equals plus or minus the square root of 1 plus the cosine of u over 2. And for the tangent, there's actually 3 different half-angle identities, and the identity that we would use would just kind of depend on the situation that we're in. Each one of them kind of has their own situations where they're useful. Now, as we're looking at these, 3 of these have this plus or minus in front of the radical, and the sign of those things, whether they're positive or negative, is going to depend on what quadrant we're in. So in this example, we're going to look at evaluating the sine of 15 degrees without using a calculator. So here's what we need to think about. We're looking at that 15 degrees, and 15 degrees itself does not show up on the unit circle, but it's half of an angle that does. 15 degrees is half of 30. So we can actually think about this sine of 15 degrees as being the sine of 30 degrees divided by 2. So then the u value that we're dealing with our half-angle formula is going to be 30 degrees. So our half-angle formula says plus or minus the square root of 1 minus the cosine of the u value, which is 30, over 2. Now, as we're looking on our unit circle, the cosine of 30 is root 3 over 2. So we have plus or minus 1 minus root 3 over 2 all over 2. Now, we don't typically like to deal with fractions inside of other fractions, so I would want to cancel out this divided by 2. So what I'm going to do is multiply the entire numerator by 2. But whatever I do to the top, I also have to do to the bottom. So then we get plus or minus the square root of 2 minus the square root of 3 all over 4. But then when we're square rooting a fraction, we can square root the top and the bottom separately. So then we would get plus or minus the square root of 2 minus root 3 all over 2. Now for our last step, we need to decide if this is going to be positive or negative. So we look back at our original angle, 15 degrees, and that's in the first quadrant. Sines, or y values, are positive in the first quadrant, so we don't have to worry about the negative. It's just going to be the positive answer. So the answer we get is the square root of 2 minus root 3 all over 2. Now in this example, we're going to look at evaluating the cosine of 5 pi over 8 without using our calculator. Now when we're dealing in radians, that always seems to make things a little trickier, and it's not always easy to establish what your u value is going to be. So as we're looking at this 5 pi over 8, what might be helpful to think about is we're dealing with a half angle, so it's going to be some angle over 2, and the answer we're getting here is this 5 pi over 8 angle. Now what I could do is I could multiply this 2 over to the other side, and this 2 would reduce down with this 8. So the u value that we're actually going to be working with as we do this half-angle formula is going to be 5 pi over 4. So we can think about this as the cosine of 5 pi over 4 over 2. So then, like we said, the 5 pi over 4 is our u value. So the cosine half-angle formula is plus or minus the square root of 1 plus the cosine of the u value, so 5 pi over 4 over 2. Now in here, as we look at the unit circle, the cosine of 5 pi over 4 is going to be negative root 2 over 2, and that's over 2 still. Now again, just like we saw in our last example, we don't typically like to have fractions inside of other fractions. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 2 to help me cancel out that divided by 2 in there. So we're going to get plus or minus the square root of 2. Now this plus and negative, I'm going to make minus the square root of 2 all over 4. But again, as we're square rooting a fraction, we can square root the top and bottom separately. So we get plus or minus the square root of 2 minus root 2 all over 2. And then again, we need to decide if this is going to be positive or negative. It's not going to be both. So we need to look back at our original angle and decide what quadrant that's in. 5 pi over 8 happens to be in the second quadrant, and cosines are negative in the second quadrant. So we want negative square root of 2 minus root 2 all over 2 as our final answer. That's going to be it for this video. Thanks for watching.